Okay, we're live. So, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Josh Jones. I'm a former Berniecrat running for governor in the Green Party now. And one of the reasons I'm running for governor is that there needs to be somebody out there who can actually speak to all the issues that people care about. A lot of the other folks running in different parties, they're either, essentially bought by corporations. They're paid. They have a culture of saying what the bosses want. And as a result, they can't really speak to most of the issues that people really care about and need on the ground. Voice and to win.
Excellent. Okay, so hey, you came from the Berniecrat movement, like a lot of us. We're supporters of Bernie Sanders. Can you tell us how you were involved in with Bernie Sanders and your campaigning for him?
Sure. So we saw him announce back east. We saw it on YouTube or whatever, and my friends and I, we said, "Wow, this guy is great. Let's plunge in there." So I think it was about June. First, we went to Sacramento, went to the first meeting that we could find, got their literature, copied it. They said, "That's awesome. Go ahead, go for it." We had enough people, we thought, in Davis to start a group in Davis, which is just west of Sacramento. And so I co-founded Davis for Bernie Sanders, and we started tabling, like I said, in June, and we got more and more people. They wanted to join in. They started tabling with us. On paper, I think we had about 300 volunteers. Consistently, we would have probably 10 organizers, maybe 20, good volunteers that would always come out, and about 150 people who would print literature and give it to us because that was a big cost. Things like that. But we had a lot of people. It was a lot of fun. We did that, for the whole time span until the primary. So in October of 2015, we started going up to Reno to help with grassroots door knocking over there. I don't remember her last name, but Christina and her husband had a house there. And we were on the ground there way before the Bernie campaign came, getting the vote out there and getting people excited. And then eventually we went to Utah. We helped with University of Nevada, Reno. I helped do the caucus there, some volunteers. And then we went over to Utah when they had their primary and did the same thing there. And it was exciting, great, met a lot of great people.
Yeah. And just overall, do you think that I guess I know the answer to this, but how do you feel about the results of the primary election?
The results in Utah were awesome. They were over 85% where we were, and HRC wasn't even viable there. So people were celebrating. There were Republicans coming into that caucus saying, "I'm a Republican." They have a open primary. I'm going to vote for Bernie, right? In Reno, in Nevada, it was less, Southern Nevada went more for HRC, Northern Nevada went more for Bernie. And then in California, well, we were obviously disappointed by the results, and we thought the numbers were different, right? But in Yolo County, we had such a strong presence that we won Yolo County for Bernie. So that was really exciting. And actually, all of Northern California and the Sierras went for Bernie as well, and some other places like Santa Barbara over on the coast.
Gotcha. Yeah.
So we were, obviously it was mixed because in our own place we won.
Right.
The numbers should have been much higher. We were really wondering why that didn't happen because from what we could tell, the momentum was with us. But the rest is history. We went to the DNC to protest in 2016.
Right. Yeah. So I mean that brings up a good point that as you're running, you've run because the success you had in your county, you've run kind of a successful campaign, so you know what to do. Maybe you could, work with the rest of the Greens on what we could do to run successful campaigns as well.
Sure.
So I see that you were part of the Occupy Decolonize movement. Can you tell us a little bit about that activism?
Sure. So I saw that happening. I saw the big tent over in Central Park in Davis. After a little while, a couple weeks, I went to talk to them and see what was up. I didn't want to believe what was on the news because that's often very stilted. And so I just went to talk, and I
Right.
ended up staying there, helping. They were all a bunch of great people. You know, we had great conversations. And I'll tell you something. So in the news, they said, "What is this about?" Right? What are your demands? Well, for one thing, it's in the name. It's Occupy Wall Street. So it was, let's hold the bankers accountable, like they did in Iceland and Spain. You know, all the deregulation, Glass-Steagall being got rid of, that caused that particular problem, the crash, right? Vis-a-vis credit default swaps messing up the market and banks being merged with investment companies and all of this. So that on its face, that's what it was about. So no one should
Yeah.
even say what was it about. But we also voted. I don't know if everybody knows this, but we voted on, I think it was about 50 something around there demands. One of them that we voted on, I think it was like a couple thousand people voted on this, maybe 7,000. One was marriage equality that needs to be passed, and we got that. You know, there are a bunch of other things. Um, some of them were very specific. Some were local to certain places, but some of these things we've actually got. And people, I don't know if people realize that we've been already getting traction on some of this.
Right.
But so we did that. We protested at Monsanto, and that was interesting. We talked about how neonicotinoids, now called neonoids, or neonics actually, but it's a derivative of nicotine, how that kills insects. So the orcharders found out, and in California, growing fruit and nut crops is really huge here, right? Some like almonds and things like that are produced in California. They care about whether or not there are bees.
Right. Of
So
course.
if they're using neonics to kill bees at the season when trees flower, that's a terrible that's terrible. And of course the orcharders are not going to like that. So there were a lot of things that happened because of that. And you know, Occupy okay, here's another thing. So in Davis, one of the main reasons for the protest was that the students were having their tuition raised yet again. And a long time ago, it was almost free, or was free after World War II, to go to University of California, right? Different campuses. So Berkeley, that was the first one, and Davis is another early one, I think. And so, you know, people who are older talk about, oh, we went there and I had a part-time job and I put myself through college. And that's why what's one of the reasons why California has the sixth largest economy in the world, because all this intellectual capital was created, like movie making, agriculture. Back in the day, it was oil production, which, you know, now we don't like, but at that time, that was part of what was taught. And there were a lot of other things that were taught. And so California has this booming economy, right? And it's not only because California is a great place where it doesn't rain all the time or whatever. It's that so much investment was put into people's knowledge that it created a climate where people can thrive, and then investment
Sure.
in the state as well, right?
Sure.
So we can get that back, but we can do it for all of the people, not just some of the people. So
Right.
so we had this thing going. People on campus were protesting. There were two different Occupy camps in Davis. There was the sort of towny one, and there was the gowny one, as they call it. So the university, it's like Davis is like two communities fused together. Over there, they were saying, we don't want our tuition raised. The response was, we're going to spray you in the face if you don't pay higher tuition, right? Now,
Right.
I talked at some point later, I talked specifically to, what is the name of the woman who's president of the UC system now? She was in Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. I
Okay.
talked on NPR. I was the first caller to talk to Janet Napolitano, and I said, I laid this out for her. I said, do you know the pepper spray was because of this? And people want to go back to this, what's called the Golden Promise of California. And what she said to me was, well, we can't just go with our hand out to the state and ask for money. And I said, well, why not? You know, that was the original purpose. UC colleges are universities are college. They're California land grants. They're on California state property, so they are intimately linked with the state, and they were funded by the state when they were created. So there's no reason that we can't do that, and we should.
Right. Uh, you know, my opinion or one perspective on the Occupy movement was the Tea Party was originally it's when it started, it was anti-tax that was supporting bailing out corporations, and I think that the Occupy movement was similar to that. That why are you giving corporate welfare when there are working class people in need? So I think that that issue is both a conservative and a progressive issue. You know what I mean? Of taking care of the working class. We just seem to see it different. But
Absolutely. They have a different perspective on some things, but ultimately, they don't want corruption in government. They don't
right,
want the government taken over by corporations. They don't want Citizens United. They are just as outraged. I mean, it's a very large percentage of the population. Republicans do not like the idea that a corporation would be a person. They know it's not true.
right,
It's just a combination of people who have rights in and of themselves. But the
sure,
inanimate object cannot have rights. That doesn't
right,
make sense. And everyone knows that, right? So, yeah, the Tea Party, very originally, if you go back to the first one, that was against taxation on tea. And what people sometimes forget is that it was the tea of the of what was it? The British India Tea Company. So it was a corporation, and the corporate tea was what they were throwing in the ocean there in the
right,
harbor. So, so the Tea Party, in its essence, right, has this idea of corporations push us around, and we shouldn't let that happen. And Occupy was exactly the same. So you're right. There is a nexus between the two. And we've
right,
talked to, I mean, people that were in Occupy with me, friends. We've gone over and talked to. We saw Tea Partiers, and we talked to them. They're pretty decent folks.
right,
They might
exactly.
just come from the countryside instead, so they have a slightly different view on how things are.
Sure, sure. Hey, so you and I talked a little bit before this interview, and you worked a little bit in the Democrat Party,
Mm,
and you have a little bit of insight. And you talked to me about something called transaction-based politics.
right.
Can you delve into that a little bit?
Sure. So, where I come from and where the Green Party comes from is from a moral stance. So what you'll see in the room is that we're talking about moral positions and activism and what we should do. And what you see in a Democratic room is, well, it's boring for one thing, but they talk about bylaws and they go on about a lot of minutia. The majority of it, and actually the whole purpose of Democratic parties, county parties, is to raise money, to fundraise, to run candidates and get them elected. So then the question is, what kind of candidates? Are they candidates that are being paid by corporations and then they can't really talk about issues important to people? They're sort of held back, right? And that's true. So, so then let's say somebody brings up a moral problem. Let's say recently, here's an example. There were big fires in California,
Yes.
and it was still grape season. It was still grape harvest season. So there were people out in Napa Valley, farm workers.
Yes.
A friend of mine got phone calls, and they were saying, "Help us!" Right? We're out here in choking smoke, picking grapes that will be lost otherwise. And so my friend said to, and she was connected with higher up Democrats, right? Cecilia Aguilar Curry, who's the assemblywoman of our area, Assembly District 4, said, "Hey, we need to do something about this.
And she
right?
was involved with the union, right? Uh, AFL-CIO, I believe.
UFW?
I'm sorry. Is it
Yeah,
UFW?
farm workers.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you probably know what I'm talking about. But anyway, so she talked to Curry, and she said,
Uh-huh.
"We need to get translators out there. We need to have directions on how they would use their smoke masks." Which, my dad was a fire captain, could have been a chief in the fire department that he was, part of. He
Right.
turned it down because he always said he was blue collar. He didn't want to be management. He wanted to be, he was a very strong union guy.
Gotcha.
But I understand the fire family. I understand, and I grew up in it, right? Unless you had a breathing apparatus that firefighters put on with a tank, I don't
Right.
think any sort of mask is actually going to help you breathe in thick
Right.
smoke.
Right.
But to her point, she said, we need translators out there. We need people to show them how to put these things on. And what I think, okay, so that didn't happen. And she was a little outraged about that, right? To put it mildly. And so we had conversations about this. And the fact is that the Democrats don't come from a moral standpoint. What they come from is a standpoint of transactional politics. Okay, so what that means is if you want something, if you're an activist, you're a lefty or whatever in the Democratic Party, and you want something, you feel like it's really important for your constituency to get some help, what you would have to do is go to the people who can leverage that, and you say, okay, what does it take for you to do this? And they might say, and this is an example, right? But they might say, I want 5,000 door knocks from 50 people to go out and get one of our politicians elected, one of our candidates elected, and that's what will get me motivated to do that. So where the Democratic Party is different from the Green Party is that the Green Party will just do these things, right? They already know that this is the right way to go. The Democratic Party operates by what can you do, right? Really hard to motivate people to go out and door knock for a candidate who doesn't speak for the people, who just sort of, you know, does this vanilla, well, we'll do some little things, incremental change, and maybe that'll be okay. While there are big problems happening in society, like people
Right.
are being thrown out of their houses constantly because of the housing crisis, rents are going skyrocketing, and so you see more and more and more homeless people, and you don't always see the same homeless people every year because I don't know what happens to them. Do they just die? And right, so like we need to take care of those problems. We need to take care of really take care of problems, not just do a little incremental thing. And that's the problem with transactional politics.
I agree. So what you're saying is that in order for you to get something done for the people, you
Mm.
need to do a favor for candidates that are probably corporate candidates,
Hmm.
highly financed, and have corporate policies that don't help the people, and
Right.
essentially make that transaction to get done what you need to get done. And the net is probably a loss for the people overall.
Exactly. Over time, the net is a loss. We see it,
Yeah.
right? Slow slide towards more and more desperation. And we can't do that.
Right.
There
Right.
are so many things going on. That's why I'm running for governor in the Green Party, right? We have
Right.
to speak to the problems and we have to get out there and get in front of these things.
Right.
Yeah.
So you touched on, let's get into your platform a little bit. You touched on affordable housing and homelessness. So as governor, what would you like to do, or what can you do for to try to bring us affordable housing and end the homeless crisis?
Right. So, one thing there are several things we can do. The state of California, the government can negotiate with developers. That's a small thing, but you want to leave no stone unturned, right? So
Right.
if you can say you have to build X amount of affordable housing, you can work with cities, and if the local ordinances are actually from them, which is very common actually, then you might have to work with local cities. But there are more things you can do, right? You can make the state of California is the sixth largest economy in the world. So there are many things we can do. If we have housing crisis, crises like we're seeing in Seattle, because you have programming companies come in and drive the local people out, right? They're now sleeping in tents or something, and that's pretty rough up in Seattle. It's bad enough in California. But you see this more and more and more, and I lived in Denmark for a month, right? And I saw the way they build there. So that's the densest population, densest country in Europe, right?
Okay.
The highest population density. So what they did there was they built high-rise apartments or condos, and they have gardens. They're beautiful. They're not tenements or something like that. They're not projects. They're places that you would want to live. You have, I don't know, 200 flats that are 2,000 square feet. You can raise a family in that. And they have gardens down below in the atrium and this big area in the middle, right? So they build kind of in a C shape. And it's very livable. And, if you're rich, if you're fairly rich, some people buy houses, some people have cars, but we could go ahead and build buildings like that. California builds bridges, they build hospitals, they build all kinds of things. The only reason that California doesn't build housing is because people don't believe in that right now. All people have to do is say, oh, and the reason that people don't think about it is nobody says it. So much corporate money is in the system, and people speak for that, the candidates speak for that money, that they don't come up with these things. They speak for the developers, probably, right? So if we just go out and say things like this, let's have California build housing, and if that is then turned over in such a way that you can buy that flat, that's great. Maybe it would be $100,000. I don't know what the value would be, but it could be much lower than what you see in the current market.
Right.
And with a surplus of housing, which developers might not like, you would see definitely wouldn't see people thrown out because their rent just went up so they can't live anywhere.
Right. Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Let's touch on mass incarceration, your views on private prison,
Mhm.
um, the BLM movement,
Mhm.
racism in general.
Mhm. Okay. So, well, I'll just say on the face of it that private prisons shouldn't exist. I don't know how that happened. I don't know why it happened. It probably happened with the general libertarian movement that occurred in the 70s and onward of privatization of everything.
Right.
Right? We see that here in the United States. We see it in Europe. We see it in other places. And that was a concerted effort to privatize different parts of the world and the economy. But so prisons, you know, there are probably a lot better ways to deal with problems when people, commit crimes or have trouble. I would think rehabilitation would be a lot smarter. I think the reason that you see the drug wars, I think the reason that you see the arrests of homeless folks and whatever, is to create uh, a population of prisoners to become slaves or quasi-slaves. And hopefully I'm not jumping ahead, but the utilization of the 13th Amendment that has a specific proviso that slavery will be abolished except in case of being a prisoner, which is
Yeah.
terrible. It shouldn't have been in there. It was probably a gimme to whoever, slave owners. And so you see later this thing where, well, it was probably a plan, right? Well, we'll go ahead and do this, and then we'll create a lot of prisons, and we'll make laws that arrest people, and then we'll have that kind of slavery. And that's just wrong. It goes against the grain of everything that we all believe in America. There are some people who want to believe that like that. I don't think that represents the majority of the people. They don't want their kids and their relatives in prison being slaves.
Right. So in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, she spells that out that after Reconstruction,
Mhm.
uh, the the bigoted, for lack of a better, well, it's the truth. The bigoted police um, departments arrested Black people for things like vagrancy and truancy and things like that, put them in jail, and essentially used them as slave labor and brought back kind of a de facto slave labor market, you know, just based on um, the
Yep.
13th Amendment, and it's not completely abolishing slavery.
Right.
So
And if you connect the dots, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that that was a plan. You know,
right,
it's not a conspiracy. They just said, well, we want cheap labor to maximize profits. So let's go ahead and put this little caveat in the 13th Amendment, make some people happy over here, make our, slave owning people happy over here,
right,
and we'll just arrest people later.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
not really
So
designed.
I don't think we mentioned this before. What do you think about California as a sanctuary state for undocumented workers?
California has a long history. It was part of Mexico, right? It's Alta California.
Sure.
So the idea, and when I studied geology, my professors would say, look, the idea that there's Central America and there's a line, and then there's North America. This is a false idea. In the sciences, we know that animals migrate, plants migrate across, and there's no line on the ground that says, "Oh, monarch butterflies don't cross here," or other migratory birds or animals, mammals. It's a false idea. So, there are a lot of crops in California or other things that people do, and people had families here in the first place. There were the Californios, right? They had been in California for a long time. They had
Sure.
Spanish land grants and all that. So, of course, people go back and forth. So, should California be a sanctuary state? We need to protect the rights of people that come here to live, right? That makes us better.
Agreed. Excellent. Um, let's talk about fossil fuels, fracking, coal plants, and how and what do you think of a renewable economy?
Sure. So, one of the things I've done is I was asked to sign a pledge not to take any more than $200 from oil, coal, and fracking. And I said, pledge that I'll take zero money because I don't want any money from anybody related to the oil, coal, and fracking industries. Those are what? Those are like 18th, 19th, and 20th century um, energy sources. There's been solar electric for almost 100 years now, right? Wind turbines are not really that hard to do. Um, there's a thing called wave generation where you have buoys that are connected, moored to the ground, seafloor, and they go up and down day and night. So, how old is buoy technology? 200 years? I'm sure it's more, right? And all these other things, electrical generator, you can house, how old is technology to seal a vessel? It's pretty old. It's probably like 50 to 100 years old. So we can make these things, and that would generate a lot of electricity day and night, right? There's geothermal. Some people have a little bit of a problem with hydroelectric. Um, we could dial that back or keep it the same, jumping over to water with in the sense of hydroelectric, there's something that I advanced towards one of my professors that why don't we have side reservoirs? So you have a big gravel quarry. There's gravel always beside rivers. If there was a gravel quarry once, why don't we make that a place where water can overflow naturally as the water rises in a flood stage, and then that will recharge the groundwater supply, ground reservoirs, and you could still pump it out with solar for agriculture. You can get, basically everything you want. Electricity can be generated by a lot of other means now, but certainly coal generation is terrible. I don't really think that nuclear is smart because nuclear, you can say, oh, it has no problem until that one for 40 years, right? Until that one day when it goes bad. And then that is a catastrophic kind of pollution, right? So, and the nuclear waste rods are also a big problem. What do you do with them? What happens when, in 200 years from now, nobody's paying attention to them and they melt down? So that also we need to take care of. But we need to get up. Essentially, we need to get off of fossil fuels and get onto renewable energy or sustainable energy, right? And actually, I don't know if I told you this before, but I worked for 4 years as a solar electric designer. In one of the, this is like, what is it, 2007 to 2011. We were doing the largest arrays around the world. We worked for the Navy, and they were on it. The Navy knew that they needed solar and all these other,
Right.
yeah. So there are so many ways that we can produce power, and maybe our society would alter a little bit. Maybe manufacturing plants are open during the day when the power is coming in. One business that we put solar in for, it was all these huge area. I can't really say where, and what it was, but it was over these roofs, right? Very large. We got 1/3 of their power produced, and they were an iron foundry, right? So when we went on the tour, we had hard hats and everything on. We went through. We had to walk in these little lines that didn't let us get too close to these kilns because they were red hot in the
Right.
daytime, and that was being produced partly by solar. So you can do that during the day. Maybe people go home at night when the power's not going. People need to rethink a little bit. I mean, maybe air conditioning is tied to solar. It could even be not grid tied. Or there could be ways so that at least it's offsetting.
Yes.
If you need air conditioning inside of a building because you can't be sweating on your paperwork, well, you can have that powered by solar. And you can put these things in building codes. So, that's another way the government can do this. And often government does. In fact, here's another, I know you want to switch to another topic, but here's another little thing. We still subsidize coal. We still, the government of the United States, the government of the United States still subsidizes oil, right? The reason that was done was it was difficult at one time, hundreds of years ago. It was difficult, and they needed a subsidy to get them off the ground. Well, now coal is going out, right? Those businesses are closing because they don't make a profit.
Right.
We don't need to subsidize that. What we need to subsidize are the emergent technologies. Just like back then when coal was an emergent property and they didn't see a problem with it, or oil was an emergent property and they didn't really see a problem with it. We need to do that for all of the sustainable energy systems as well.
Sure. So I want to tell you, you could talk as long as you want on a topic, even though I might be looking ahead, just because I just want to make sure I have the next question ready for you. I don't want to cut you short. One thing about fossil fuels is I think that, for instance, the Dakota Access Pipeline and the government's push, even with the wars abroad, I think this is the last hurrah for fossil fuels.
I think so too.
So I think the market is dying, and I think you're right. We need to invest in renewables. It's the obvious way to go. It'll create jobs. And in California, if it can be done, we have the people in California that can do it. I believe that. I mean, we have great engineering.
Right.
This is the place for it, right? And we're also very progressive. So
right. I mean, speaking on that, actually, what I've read is that one of the reasons that that they're pushing so hard on these pipelines is because the profit on oil is so slight now. The margin is so small that they need to find a transportation method that's extremely efficient, right? So, and all of this infrastructure is going to be built, and then it's not profitable, and we're going to have these pipelines, and they're going to have to, we have to use it because we invested in all of this, right? The bankers are going to say, well, you have to keep doing it. So they're pushing really hard, but it's a dying industry. So we shouldn't be following the dying industry. What we see in different eras is that infrastructure is put in for a certain kind of energy technology, right, or energy source. And you saw that with horse and buggy. There were all sorts of things, and then you see that with gasoline, right? So now we see it with gasoline. That infrastructure has to change, right? So you'd have to put in electrical powering stations. Well, the powers that be, those people who get money off of this, they want to squeeze that infrastructure until no more money comes out, like blood out of a turnip, right? There's a point where you have to switch. And one of the things that happened after the Depression, frankly, it wasn't a recession, it was a depression, 2007 and 8, people said we need to take, because a lot of people needed work, we need to take this what they said, was cheap labor, which frankly would have been going back to FDR and having people, the government paying people to work, right, and create infrastructure just like they did after the Great Depression. And the conservative side fought that. And it's actually kind of strange that they fought it, because we could have switched to a whole new system of infrastructure right then. And we should have. And I think a lot of people knew it, that we should have at that time. We didn't. We can still do it.
Yes, excellent. And then you talked about you'd like to decommission all the nuclear plants.
Yeah. So, we saw what happened with Fukushima. I'm sure a lot of
Yes.
people have seen it on YouTube and whatever. I remember watching that happen. It was March 11 of 2011, or March 21 of 2011. And I was working for that solar electric engineering firm. We watched that there was the tsunami, and then we saw the buildings explode, and I knew right away, looking at it, I said, that means that it's melting down, because that kind of explosion is from hydrogen building up inside of the containment vessel.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason that the hydrogen is created is if zirconium is the covering on the outside of the fuel rods is exposed to air in the interface between the air and the water. That means the water is poured out. So I immediately said, okay, those vessels cracked, the water poured out, and it went boom, right? Okay, those are Mark I reactors. There are, I think it's 126 around the Northern Hemisphere. Same type, right? Not only did they have their backup generator in the basement, and if you look at how nuclear power plants are done, they're always along a river, and they're almost always at the ocean, which means that tsunamis can occur in every one of them that are on the ocean. And so, yeah, like having your backup generator, so and the power went off. Now you can't mix the water in the cooling pond for the spent fuel rods. When the water sits there, it cooks off because of the heat of the rods. And then you have this chemical reaction, boom, and throws the pellets everywhere. Why in the world would you put the generator in the basement where it's going to flood and fry, and then you can't keep mixing the water? And, put it on the roof. And the fuel, the spent fuel pools were up in the ceiling, right? They're suspended. So if there's an earthquake, they break and the water pours out. And you can pour as much water in as you want, and it doesn't stay in the pool. Those should be in the basement, right? But they engineered it that way for convenience or a cheaper construction. That kind of problem, and when you add to it the problem with spent fuel rods, what do you do with them? They create all these isotopes in the reaction, and then you have to put them in something. You can keep them in the pools and cool them for thousands of years. I'm not sure that anyone's going to even know what they are 1,000 years from now.
Hopefully not.
Whether or not the pump is running for 1,000 years.
Yes.
Sometimes I joke that there should be hand cranked pumps beside every one of these things, just in case electricity goes out. You can go get a bunch of people to turn it. It's crazy. It seems crazy to me. But anyway, so another solution is to dry cask the spent fuel rods. And that's essentially, to simplify it, that's a big container where you put these long rods in, and the fuel rods are like a big pencil, a lot of rods with pellets in them, and they have a band around them. Well, you can take that apart and slide it into a basket and keep them separated. Then you put them in a steel container, right? And this, several tons. The ones in America, as I've been talking to people, are only about an inch thick, maybe an inch and a half, and they're made out of the wrong kind of steel. In Europe, they're made of ductile steel, and they're something like 10 inches thick.
Wow.
So the problem with this is that also the ones in America are welded shut. There's no way to sense on the inside whether there's a crack. There's no way to check on what's happening. If they get cracked, they can't be moved. If they can't be moved, they can't be put in what we use in the United States is a thicker transport vessel, which is thick, right? Why they didn't create the thick vessels in the first place out of ductile steel so that they won't become brittle and crack, I have no idea. They use it in Europe. We could do it here. We could build that here. It's not hard. So the system that we're using to dry cask is not isn't good, and it needs to be upgraded. And as I talk to people about this who are familiar with the industry, they say that the higher ups are not aware. It's the field techs, the field scientists on the ground who say, yeah, I know what this problem is, but they're not the ones making decisions. So, and then if they put them just above the water line near, what if there's a tsunami? What if there's a large winter storm that drags a bunch of the sand out to sea, you know, and it pulls these things into the ocean or breaks them? That might be one of the most important things for us to deal with, because they have as much isotopic radiation in them, which is chemical. It's not like gamma radiation or anything. You know, strontium, cesium, these isotopes. As Chernobyl, one of these dry casks, which are, you know, the size of a bed of a truck.
Right.
We have to figure out how to do that and decommission nuclear power plants, which are problematic, but also how do we deal with the existing spent fuel rods and cool them down over thousands of years? We need to use a little better technology than what we're using right now.
Absolutely. It sounds like an accident waiting to happen. Sounds like not a when, not if.
Yeah, and we should not have it be a win.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So you had some opinions on cattle farming. Can you elaborate on that for me?
Sure. So I grew up in the countryside as well, and my dad has a cattle ranch, and it's grass fed. And as it turns out, we were talking about the life of cattle, and we always took good care of them, and you know, so you know, we're not abusing them with rods or whipping them or anything like that, like you see in the movies, or you know, something else like that. And frankly, a lot of people don't do that. Frankly, a lot of people treat cattle well in their first part of their lives. They all live in pastures, grass fed. Some are nicer. The ones that we have, you know, oak trees they can get under for shade, and they have a pretty idyllic life. But what happens is, we were talking about this, and my dad mentioned that it's really the last 6 months of cattle's life where they live in feedlots.
Gotcha.
And you've probably seen feedlots or driven past them on the 5 or different places. So I really think we need to ban cattle feedlots. And the reason for that is it's many-fold, right? One, it creates a ton of methane. It creates a huge amount of methane. You see
Right.
the clouds of methane rising up. It smells terrible. So, you know, you want to talk about housing, there's no way you can build housing around that. No one's going to
Right.
live there. It pollutes the groundwater by all this sewage sinking into the groundwater.
Hmm.
And the cattle have to live in this, stand in this filth, right? It's bad for them. It's just bad morally. And also, they feed them things that cattle aren't supposed to eat, whether it's, you know, well, a while ago we heard about them being fed ground up animals, but you know,
Gotcha.
it also could be cheap feed like soybeans and whatever, and
Yes.
that kind of stuff. But antibiotics, they pump the food full of antibiotics because the cattle live in such bad conditions. That creates superbugs, right? Which is bad for society as well. And people not even living near there, they eat the meat, or they eat the meat, and then if they get a superbug, then they're going to spread it to other people. I mean, it
Exactly.
even goes to healthcare, right? So by banning feedlots, which are small concerns, in the big scheme of things, they are not that important. Cattle will grow to a certain point and end up in the exact same condition without the feedlots as with them. We can ban them.
Gotcha.
It won't change. Maybe it makes beef a little more expensive.
Hmm.
Maybe it makes people eat a little less. That would be fine. right?
Right.
I mean, I eat beef, but I wasn't raised to eat a giant steak.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, let's see. Let's move on to your opinion on college, public schools versus private schools, and college tuition. And
Mhm.
also, Jill Stein talked about forgiving student loan debt. Where are you on those issues?
I have exactly the same position as Jill. We do need to forgive student loan debt, which is becoming another bubble, like the housing bubble. We
Right.
talk about that, how it could crash our economy as well. And we need to make, for sure, in California, we need to make the UC system tuition free. And also, we need to think about community colleges and trade schools. Not everybody wants to go get a degree in, geology or something. Some people want to learn how to do some kind of trade. That should also be, and that buoys up the economy for everybody, right? It
Right.
makes it better for everybody because you have more know-how, you have more businesses, and frankly, people have better lives. They become more enlightened. But you know, the idea that you should have a debt of, I don't know, somewhere between 70,000 and a couple 100,000. How in the world is that going to make it so that people now, millennials for sure, go out and buy a house? So you wonder what's happening with the housing market. I can't believe it's going up because um, people can't afford. I don't know that nobody I know in California who's a millennial can afford a house right now, to buy a house, right? I
Right.
mean, it used to be that rent. Speaking of that, it used to be that when I was in school, it was I was told it was 1/4 of your economy. My brother was told it was 1/3. He's a little younger than me. Um, I asked my parents, and they said that it was 1/8. And now people say half or more. But that's not
Yes.
sustainable, right? So something has to give, and jacking people's tuition up is not the answer, right? It really, I have a friend in Denmark, right? I have several friends in Denmark, but one of them is going to school to be a teacher. And he talked to me recently, and he said he's getting paid essentially $5,000. I think it's per quarter to go to school. He's getting paid. Plus, he has his housing taken care of and food. And I asked him, well, okay, I get that Denmark is an awesome place, but why is that? And he said, well, because the government here says that we are helping society by becoming a teacher, right? So why are people in debt to help society in California? It's
Exactly.
backwards.
Yeah, so it's interesting to me that the age of consent is 18. You
Mhm.
can now sign a contract, and two of the major options you have is to enlist in the army
Mhm.
or the military, where you're going to have to go kill and or be killed,
Mhm.
or sign yourself to a student loan debt which survives bankruptcy. It's like they take
Mhm.
advantage of you right away. I feel like we need to stick up for our young people and end this kind of thing.
Absolutely, government should the purpose of government is to be there to take care of and help foster an environment that's good for the people. It's supposed to help the people, right? Create a place where we can thrive. The government isn't supposed to be there to make deals for the corporations to gouge the people, right? And
Exactly.
and we need to get the government back to that position where it's helping the people and it's sticking up for the people and getting, making sure that everybody has health care, because frankly, that's why we are supposed to have health care, so that people can thrive. It's not to pay off a bunch of insurance companies.
Right, right. So that's a good segue. I think probably this is the last topic,
Mhm.
but your governorship,
Mhm.
being that you're an advocate for healthcare,
Mhm.
and Maria Estrada, who just announced she was going to run against Anthony Rendon,
Right.
um, could give us a pathway to passing SB 562. Can
Yep.
you talk about your position, first of all, on healthcare, SB 562, and have you done any activism concerning healthcare in California?
Absolutely. We've been out there in front of SB 562 all the way. I know people who run Healthcare for All California, which is a big proponent of SB 562. I think it might even be called Healthy California.
Healthy California, yes.
Right, and so yeah, they're very much Dan and Millie Bronstein actually run that, and so when I was president of the Berniecrats Labor Alliance, one of the first clubs that were Berniecrats, I guess they're popping up now, of Yolo County, and during that time, I was president for a couple months, and that's why I was called a leader in the Democratic Party. I guess people said that of me, not I wasn't going around saying that, but it was kind of interesting to hear. So it came up, should we advocate for this, right? We went out to the rallies. We were at all the rallies with the nurses, NNU and all of them. And one of the people that I recruited is a nurse, and she went to the U.S. Congress to speak on single payer and Medicare for all and that kind of thing. Melissa Johnson. So we were always right in there, right? And when it came time to support it, we got on a list that said that we support SB 562, right? And so you see at the very top, Berniecrats Labor Alliance of Yolo County. So it was an exciting thing to see that, and we loved going out to the rallies. I shot a video of us all in the rotunda yelling, "Healthcare is a human right," and all this.
Yes.
It was super awesome. We were crushed when Rendon tabled it. It was in the Senate. It passed to the Senate, and to Bill Dodd's credit, our senator in this area, California senator, he voted yes on it. So, it went out of the Assembly and it was fine. It went out of the Senate and it was fine. It went into the Assembly. Rendon is the Speaker of the Assembly in California. He tabled it, and some of the excuses that we heard sometimes are, well, it didn't have provisions within it. It was a shell, right? The fact is, we had heard a long time ago that the plan was it was going to go in the Assembly. There were committees that had parts of SB 562 that they were going to slot in, how to pay for it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It was never able to do that because it was tabled by Rendon, right? Now, I'll tell you, I think that government health care is a necessary part of social infrastructure, just like sewers and water systems and roads, right? So if you look at sewer systems or water systems, you go to another part of the United States or California, you turn on the tap and drink the water, right? That's healthcare. The sewer systems that make sure that waste is taken care of, right? And all those plants, those industrial plants that do that, that's healthcare. There was a movement about 100 years ago to not have cholera and diphtheria in the United States. That was a healthcare plan and program that they carried out, right? Municipal water systems went in, and nobody hears about diphtheria, nobody hears about cholera in the United States anymore. Now we have a more evolved industrial society, right? People drive really fast all around. They go from place to place. Diseases can be transmitted more easily. People fly in planes all over the world. In order for our society to thrive, we need to have a larger healthcare system, right? Where you can go to the doctor, or you can get mental health, or you can go to the dentist, right? Why are we allowing people to suffer like this? I thought doctors were supposed to prevent suffering. How can it be that the government won't provide a thing that Japan has, that Canada has, that France has, that numerous countries around the world have? We have the 6th largest economy in the world, and we're supposedly not able to afford it. That's impossible.
Yeah, so every time I hear a politician talk about being against SB 562, it's always because of the financial reasons. And everything you talked about is about the moral imperative,
Right.
the common sense human need that
Mhm.
we're all going to need at some point in our lifetime.
Mhm.
And I think that's what they just ignore. And the fact that it's universal health care is a reality in most of Western civilization.
Right.
I mean, yeah.
Yeah.
So
In fact, I can speak on the numbers a little. So California, the GDP is, so that's yearly, is I believe $2.4 trillion. And the estimate report came out very solid. I read the whole thing, many pages. They estimate was something like 500 billion to pay for it. So that's about what it was, between 1/16 and 1/18 of the economy of California. That is a deal, right? That's not too expensive. Not only that, but California already pays for this somehow. Somehow the money goes from one place to another, and this provision occurs. So one thing that I've talked about with Millie, and that I want to iron down more, but here's the broad stroke, right? It's been said that 70%, and I guess this is documented, it's been said that 70% of healthcare in California is already paid for by the government of California. Now, insurance companies take 30% right off the top. If that's true, right, and those numbers are broadly accurate, then if you didn't have insurance companies that you were going through to get healthcare, it's paid for right now, right? And I'll add one other thing, which is this goes back to history, and I'll go to history of insurance, right? I like talking about the history of things, history of government healthcare in the United States. Um, so this is the history of insurance. Insurance started because of spice trading ships in Europe. They wanted to go either trade or steal, frankly, spices from Indonesia or whatever. So they'd get ships. They'd certain people would invest. They would buy a ship, and they'd pay for a captain. They'd pay a crew, and they'd get provisions. And they'd go over to wherever across the ocean to get these spices. Sometimes they'd sink, and so their ship didn't come in. Right? Okay. So they concocted this idea. Well, let's get people to put money in a pot, and if your ship sinks, get some of your money back. So that's insurance, right? Catastrophic failure. Now, an analogy to that would be something like life insurance. Someone gets life insurance, someone dies, some money goes to their family member to take care of them when the other person can't make money to support them. Okay, I get that. We can talk about insurance and whether it's good or not another point, but I get that idea. It makes more sense. You can talk about car insurance. So let's say you pay for car insurance. We have to in California. If my car is totaled, it pays out. But I'm not going to use my insurance to put gas in the car. I'm not going to use my insurance to put oil in the car for maintenance. I'm not going to use my insurance to put wheels on the car if they need wheels. So how in the world did insurance get involved? And I'm not talking about how mechanically, because I understand the mechanics has to do with World War II and people coming back and there being a surplus of labor and all that. How in the world did insurance morally get turned into the way that you get healthcare? It doesn't make any sense. It's an anathema, right? It should be that government provides it to take care of the people. That's it, so they can thrive. That's what it's for.
absolutely, absolutely. So also because you have the insurance pool, the healthcare providers are able to charge more. Pharmaceuticals are able to charge more. So that's driven up the price of healthcare right there.
Right.
Take that away, efficiency increases, prices come down.
There are a lot of efficiencies, right? First of all, insurance companies are pricing themselves out of the market, and the ACA was kind of a giveaway. Even though I wrote about it and I fought for it, I wrote all the senators and the Congress, U.S. Congress people, and all that, president, vice president, in support. And I gave historical reasons why. Well, for instance, the first vice president, second president of the United States, John Adams, was instigatory in creating the Marine Health Service Act, which was, and this is in 1798, I think. He got this government healthcare established in the very beginning of our nation, back in 13 colonies, to make sure that syphilis and other things that Navy people and merchant marines were bringing to the little thin strip of colonies didn't get into the population. So they had islands where they built huge palatial hospitals to take care of this, right? There was a movement within our country, a movement for and a movement against, you know? And this has happened throughout the history of our country. We didn't want to have kids working, right? So we got rid of that. We didn't want to have we wanted to have a weekend. We wanted to have a 40-hour work week. These things occurred in the United States and got exported. And there have always been a large group of people who, or not large, maybe a small group of people who vociferously fought against these things.
Right.
But yeah, healthcare is definitely part of the narrative of the United States and California.
So when you're governor, you're going to sign SB 562 when we get it across your desk, right?
In a heartbeat, I'll call for it. I'll say, bring it to the floor in the assembly, fix it, put all those provisions in, send it to the desk.
Awesome.
I will sign it.
Josh, I really hope you do well in the election, and we see you pledging in as governor in 2019. I believe it would happen. 2018, yeah. Yeah, I just want to thank you for running for the Green Party and doing this interview with us. Is there any last? The one thing I want to ask you is, do you have a website where we can donate to your campaign or sign up to volunteer?
Right. So it's Josh, JOSH 4 gov.org. Right, and you can look on Facebook and you'll find this. You use the same thing. And the Twitter actually is the same. And you can go on there. There's a way to go to contributions on there. If you on your phone, there's a little menu, 3 dashes, and you can go into that. There's about Josh bio on there and all that. So yes, definitely you can